A grandfather in his 60s, Bruce McArthur escaped detection because he did not fit the profile of a serial killer. Michael Arntfield, a criminologist at the University of Western Ontario who studies all solved and unsolved murders in North America going back 50 years, pointed out that murders committed by people aged 60 or older account for fewer than 2% of the total. None of them include serial sexual offenders like McArthur. Arrested in 2018, aged 67, McArthur pleaded guilty to 8 murders. The first was in 2010 when he was 58. This has led criminologists such as Arntfield to assume that he must have begun his murderous career sometime earlier. But no previous homicide has been ascribed to him, despite the largest investigation ever conducted by the Toronto Police Service, which also called on the resources of the Ontario Provincial Police, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and other police and forensic services. Born in 1951 in rural Ontario, McArthur felt that he had suffered at the hands of his strict Scottish Presbyterian father because he sensed his son's incipient homosexuality. Perhaps as a riposte, McArthur married his childhood sweetheart in 1974 at the age of 23. They had 2 children. They moved to a suburb of Toronto where he was a pillar of the church and worked as a buyer for Eaton's department store, just a few blocks from the city's burgeoning gay village. Homosexuality had been decriminalized in Canada in 1969. Between 1975 and 1978, 14 men from Toronto's gay community turned up dead. Half of the cases were solved, the others went cold. Detective Sergeant Hank Idsinga, lead investigator on the McArthur case, said, "Would it surprise me if Mr. McArthur was linked to some murders from his late 20s? It wouldn't. But no positive link has ever been established." He quit Eaton's in 1978 to become a traveling salesman, selling socks and underwear. This may have presented opportunities. "I'm being completely hypothetical here," said clinical psychologist Dr. John Bradford, who examined the case after McArthur was arrested. "But let's make an assumption. This is a guy that's traveled around a bit. He's been a salesman, which puts him in a situation where he could find vulnerable victims. But let's assume for argument's sake that he may have started in his late 30s, and there may have been one incident every 5 years, and he's now looking at 20 or 30 years of potential homicides. And he could easily have got away with it. If you dump a body in northern Ontario, it's pretty much lights out," Arntfield said. "There's a good chance they're never going to find the remains." At the age of 40, McArthur began cheating on his wife with men and came out a year and a half later. He and his wife continued living together, eventually separating after 25 years of marriage. At that time, he began seeing a psychiatrist and was on Prozac for about 6 months. He then had a 4-year relationship with a man. They lived together but broke up when his boyfriend refused to commit. Around the same time, McArthur went bankrupt and finally got a divorce. McArthur was just turning 50 in 2001 when he answered a small ad in a gay magazine. It had been placed by actor and model Mark Henderson, who let McArthur into his apartment around noon on the 31st of October to show him his Halloween costume. McArthur struck him from behind several times with the metal pipe that he said he carried to protect himself from street hustlers. Henderson fought back before losing consciousness. When he came round, he called 911 and was taken to St. Michael's Hospital. There it was found that he had suffered injuries to his head and body. He needed several stitches to the back of his head and his fingers, as well as 6 weeks of physiotherapy. After handing himself in, MacArthur pleaded guilty to charges of assault with a weapon and assault causing bodily harm. He apologized to the victim and said he did not remember the attack and wondered whether he was suffering an epileptic seizure at the time. He was given a conditional sentence of 2 years less a day, which would see MacArthur spend the first year under house arrest, followed by a curfew for 6 months. The sentence would be followed by 3 years probation. During the sentence, MacArthur was barred from the downtown area that included Toronto's gay village to prevent him from endangering male sex workers. He was also barred from owning a gun for 10 years, and his DNA was added to the police database. A psychiatric report prepared for the case concluded that his risk for violence is very minimal. This proved not to be the case. Indeed, he signed up to gay dating sites, asking for submissive men of all ages. He told potential sexual partners that he was looking to see how much you can take and promising to push till you can't take any more. A regular on the gay scene, his Facebook page showed him partying, particularly with young men of South Asian or Middle Eastern heritage. Working as a self-employed landscape gardener, he frequently employed young men of a similar background. They also appeared in nude photographs in his bathroom, according to a friend of his son, Todd, who came to stay with him after being jailed for 14 months for making obscene phone calls. The men had erections, and the friend said Todd had told him they were acquaintances of his father. By then, MacArthur had moved into a neighborhood largely populated by immigrants. Anonymous tip-off. In November 2012, Project Houston was set up under Detective Sergeant Id Singha to investigate the disappearance of Skanda Navaratnam, Abdul Basir Faizi, and Majid Kayhan from Toronto's gay village. After an anonymous tip-off, MacArthur was interviewed as a potential witness. He admitted knowing Navaratnam and Faizi, also saying that he had employed Kayhan in his landscaping business and had a sexual relationship with him, which he broke off. It transpired that Navaratnam, a 40-year-old Tamil refugee, had also worked for MacArthur and had had a sexual relationship with him. They had met 10 years before he disappeared, leaving his newly acquired dog behind the bar in a gay bar called Zippers. The police had briefly investigated a possible link between Navaratnam's murder and convicted killer Luca Magnota. 42-year-old Faizi was an Afghan immigrant. His car was found abandoned near a popular cruising spot for gay men and, coincidentally, near MacArthur's apartment. 58-year-old Kayhan was also an immigrant from Afghanistan who had fled with his wife and children during the Soviet-Afghan War. The couple had since divorced. Neither man had come out to his family. Nothing connected MacArthur to the missing men, and in 2014, after he had already committed 3 murders, MacArthur was granted a record suspension, which meant his criminal past would no longer be shown on background checks. On the 26th of June 2017, 49-year-old Andrew Kinsman disappeared after attending Pride Toronto, leaving his cat in his apartment without food and water. He had known MacArthur for at least 10 years after being the barman at the Black Eagle, a gay bar where MacArthur hung out. Earlier that year, 44-year-old Turkish immigrant Salim Esen had gone missing. He had no fixed abode, sofa surfing with friends after being kicked out by his boyfriend. Asen had recently completed a week-long course on peer counseling at St. Stephen's Community House. MacArthur was also a client there. A new investigation, Project Prism, was set up to investigate the disappearance of Kinsman and Asen, and to look into whether there were any links to the unsolved disappearances 5 years earlier, investigated by Project Houston. Project Prism was again headed by Detective Sergeant Idsinga. His caseload expanded on the 29th of November, when the body of 22-year-old Tess Ritchie was found in a stairwell after a night out in Toronto's gay village 4 days earlier. The next day, the body of Alora Wells, a homeless transgender woman, was identified, although her body had been found in August. However, Toronto's chief of police, Mark Saunders, assured the public that there was no evidence that a serial killer was at work. In the Kinsman case, at last the police had something to go on. The name Bruce was written against the 26th of June on a calendar in Kinsman's apartment. Checking the CCTV footage from the camera outside Kinsman's block, the police identified someone matching his appearance getting into a red 2004 Dodge Caravan. Although neither the face of the driver nor the license plate were clearly visible, a vehicle of that make and description had been registered to Bruce MacArthur. He had since sold it for scrap, but fortunately the police tracked it down before it was crushed, and they found traces of blood. It turned out to be Kinsman's. Asen's DNA was also found. The investigation went into overdrive. After obtaining a warrant, the police surreptitiously entered MacArthur's apartment and cloned his computer's hard drive. Among the deleted files, they found pictures of the missing men dead. They were posed, naked except for a hat or fur coat, sometimes with their eyes taped open and a cigar dangling from their lips. Some of their heads or beards had been shaved, and MacArthur kept the hair as a trophy, along with jewelry and a notebook. MacArthur was put under 24-hour surveillance, with instructions that he should be arrested immediately if he was seen alone with anyone. On the 18th of January 2018, a young man was seen entering his apartment. Fearing for his safety, the police entered the flat to find him handcuffed to the bed. MacArthur was trying to tape his mouth shut and put a plastic bag over his head. The victim was an immigrant from the Middle East. Again, he was married and had not told his family he was gay. They had met through a dating app and they had had sex several times before. MacArthur was arrested and charged with the murders of Kinsman and Asen. The problem was their bodies had not been found. The search was on. Forensic teams scoured properties where MacArthur had been landscaping. They found the dismembered bodies of 3 men in large planter pots. Charges were laid against MacArthur for the murder of Majid Kayhan, Soroush Mahmoudi, who had disappeared in 2015, and Dean Lisowick, a homeless man who had never been reported missing. 50-year-old Mahmoudi was a refugee from Iran. He had been reported missing by his wife, but his family knew of no connection between him and the Toronto gay scene. However, before his marriage, he had had a 4-year relationship with a transgendered woman. Liswick was 44 and a resident of Toronto's shelter system. An addict, he had supported his habit by working as a male prostitute. Soon afterwards, the police found 3 more bodies in planters, including that of Andrew Kinsman, but the cadaver dogs were having trouble in unearthing any more because the ground was frozen. Kinsman's body was identified by fingerprints, while those of Navaratnam and Mahmudi were identified from dental records. A seventh set of remains was discovered in a planter, and the police released the picture of another alleged victim in the hope that someone would recognize him. MacArthur was charged with an eighth count of first-degree murder to do with the death of Kirushna Kumar Kanagaratnam. Another Tamil refugee from Sri Lanka, he had disappeared in 2015, but no one had reported him missing because he was on the run from a deportation order. MacArthur pleaded guilty to 8 charges of first-degree murder. Noting his lack of remorse, the judge sentenced him to life imprisonment with no eligibility for parole for 25 years, when he would be 91. As he was overweight and suffered from type 2 diabetes, it was unlikely he would live that long. The police came in for criticism over their investigation, as MacArthur had been on the loose for 8 years since his first known murder. They had also missed a trick in 2016 when MacArthur and an unidentified man who he met through a dating app were masturbating each other in the back of MacArthur's van in a McDonald's restaurant parking lot. MacArthur allegedly began throttling the man who broke free, saying he was going to the police. It seems that MacArthur followed him to a police station or went there while the man phoned police. MacArthur told the police the man had choked him, or that the incident was consensual. The man had asked to be choked, then panicked and fled. However, MacArthur was not charged and was released after his story was deemed credible. No report was filed. Homicide investigators only became aware of the alleged incident after MacArthur's arrest, when the man came forward again to report it. MacArthur had pictures of this man. In some, he was wearing a fur coat similar to the one in which MacArthur posed his victims. Similarly, his conviction for the attack on Mark Henderson had not come up on background checks. The police were accused of being lackadaisical in their investigation because the victims were gay and not white. This is something that hasn't happened in our city before. We've sat back and watched CNN and watched news reports on serial killers in other countries, but we haven't seen it here, said Police Chief Saunders. We knew that people were missing and we knew we didn't have the right answers, but nobody was coming to us with anything. If things are not reported, it emboldens the suspect.